Black Myth Wukong just proved that Xbox lied to us. This week, Black Myth Wukong has finally arrived on Xbox almost exactly 1 year after the game took the world by storm on PlayStation 5 and PC. Now, let me be clear, this isn't just some belated happy ending for Xbox players. No, this long-delayed release is proof that Microsoft have spent the last year lying to us about why the game wasn't here in the first place. That's right, for 12 long months we were fed stories, half-truths and convenient denials. It was barefaced. Xbox executives swore blind that the delay wasn't about their hardware, while journalists regurgitated rumours of shadowy exclusivity deals with Sony. Meanwhile, what really made this situation sting was that the actual developers were desperately trying to explain the truth, that Microsoft's own strategy, and in particular their deliberately underpowered budget console, the Series S, was the real obstacle all along. So today we're going to unpack how Black Myth Wukong exposes Xbox's biggest weakness, because this wasn't just an ordinary delay, it serves as a case study in spin, damage control and a platform falling further behind its rivals with every passing year. While Xbox's audience keeps shrinking, Steam's player base just keeps ballooning. And speaking of actually playing games, why on earth would you still play full price when the good stuff is going for pocket change? You can grab 40% off Black Myth Wukong itself, 24% off Mafia the Old Country, 22% off Elden Ring Night Reign, and a frankly ridiculous 43% off Expedition 33, 29% off Stellar Blade, and yes, even Wu Chang Fallen Feathers is sitting there with a chunky discount, and that's before you start digging through the thousands of other bargains waiting for you. So do yourself a favour, make a shopping list, fill up your basket and laugh at the mugs who are still paying full retail price. Links are down below. Happy shopping, and now back to the video. When Black Myth Wukong launched in August 2024 on PlayStation 5 and PC, it wasn't just another Souls-like chasing From Software's coattails, it was a cultural thunderclap. Within its first month, the game sold over 20 million copies, raking in more than $700 million in revenue, instantly cementing itself as one of the most successful Chinese-produced AAA games of all time. In fact, it wasn't just a hit, it was one of the fastest selling video games ever made. Academic analysis even described it as a watershed moment for China's games industry, proof that a Chinese developer could compete directly with the West and Japan on the global stage. Players gushed over its breathtaking visuals, meticulously crafted environments, and the way it embedded Chinese mythology into every corner of the world. Aesthetically, it was unmatched, a genuine showcase of what gaming could be when grounded in authentic cultural storytelling rather than corporate focus group nonsense, and that's exactly why Xbox's absence became so glaring. Here was the biggest game of 2024, a global cultural event that managed to bridge East and West, and Xbox owners were left standing outside the gates. No matter how Microsoft tried to spin it, no matter what excuses were thrown around, the simple fact remained: if you were on Xbox, you were missing out on the game of the year. So this raises the ugly question, why wasn't Xbox a part of the party? Let's break down the responses we were told. Back in June of 2024, before the game even launched, developer Game Science gave what seemed at the time to be a perfectly reasonable explanation. They announced that the Xbox version was delayed because they were still working on optimization. Their official statement read: "We are currently optimizing the Xbox version to meet our quality standards. We apologize for the delay and aim to minimize the wait for Xbox users." Fair enough, right? At least that's what everyone thought at the time. Xbox players wouldn't get the game on day one, but they'd get it soon, once it had been polished up properly. But a huge catch would soon be revealed that would expose why Xbox users would not be getting this game anytime soon. The truth appeared to be that optimization on Xbox doesn't just mean tweaking a few settings and calling it a day. This is because Microsoft's parity rules, which means that every game released for the platform has to run on both the Series X and Series S. Developers aren't allowed to release a game on one without making sure it also works on the other. And that's where the real problem started for Black Myth Wukong on the all-American consoles. On paper, the Series X is a beast, 12 teraflops of GPU power, native 4K gaming and 1 terabyte SSD, and a disk drive for physical media. It was sold as a premium option, the console for the hardcore player who wanted the absolute best. The Series S, on the other hand, was marketed as the budget-friendly digital-only alternative. It runs at 4 teraflops, targets 1440p instead of 4K, and ships with a pitiful 512GB SSD. Both consoles share the same library, but the S version is always scaled back. That might sound manageable for most games, but when you're trying to bring over a title as visually demanding as Black Myth Wukong, that little white box becomes a bloody ball and chain. And it wasn't just Wukong. Remember the Baldur's Gate 3 debacle? That game launched everywhere except Xbox because Larian Studios couldn't get split-screen co-op to run properly on the Series S. In the end, in that game's case, Xbox had to make a humiliating exception to its own parity policy just to get the game released. So Wukong wasn't an isolated problem, it was a part of a pattern. Game Science's own CEO Feng Ji admitted as much in January 2025, writing on Weibo, "That 10GB shared memory, I can't really get it without a few years of optimization experience." In other words, the Series S simply didn't have the resources to handle a game of this scale, at least not without major consequences. And if you don't want to take the developer's words for it, Digital Foundry put this theory to the test. They simulated how Black Myth Wukong might perform on the Series S, and the results were catastrophic. Frame rates plummeted as low as 18 frames per second, even after stripping away graphical flourishes. The game barely held together, and it raised the uncomfortable question, could Black Myth even exist on the Series S without being butchered into an unrecognisable mess? This was the ugly truth Xbox didn't want you to think about. Their budget console, the one they market as the affordable gateway into next-gen, is dragging down their premium system. This means that Series X owners who shelled out for the so-called most powerful console in the world were left waiting an entire year for one of the biggest games ever made purely because the weak model couldn't keep up. Now, you'd think with all this evidence piling up that Microsoft might just admit that its little budget box was the culprit, but no. Instead, they decided to double down on spin. So when you look at all of this, it's painfully obvious as to why it was harder to get Black Myth Wukong running on Xbox than on PlayStation. The parity rules, the weak hardware, the optimization nightmare, the writing was on the wall. But of course, that's not the line Microsoft wanted out in public, which is where things get even juicier. By late August, the narrative started to twist. Rumours began surfacing that the problem wasn't the Series S at all, but some sort of secret exclusivity deal with Sony. And right in the middle of it was Paul Tassi of Forbes, busily typing away a series of contradictory takes that managed to confuse everyone even more. On the 20th of August of 2024, Tassi published a piece titled, "When's Xbox's Black Myth Wukong's release date?" He reassured readers that no, Sony hadn't bought up a year of exclusivity, the issue was the Series S, plain and simple. He even compared it to the Baldur's Gate 3 situation where Xbox had to wait months because the weak machine couldn't handle split-screen co-op. All good so far, except 9 days later on the 29th of August, he posted a complete about face. This time, he claimed that an anonymous source had told him the delay wasn't about optimization at all, but was due to a Sony exclusivity deal. No proof, no documents, no evidence whatsoever, just a source with knowledge of the situation. In other words, trust me, bro. Essentially, Tassi insinuated that PlayStation had slipped Game Science a backroom deal to keep the game off Xbox, and while timed exclusives aren't unusual in this industry, The article produced nothing concrete to back it up. It was hearsay packaged as reporting, but still, there was more. On the 3rd of September, Tassi returned with what looked like something more substantial. Microsoft itself had provided him with a statement, which read, "As we have said before, we're excited for the launch of Black Myth Wukong on Xbox Series X and S, and are working with Game Science to bring the game to our platforms. We'd prefer not to comment on the deals made by our partners with other platform holders, but we can confirm that the delay is not due to Xbox platform limitations that have been raised to us." In other words, nope, nothing wrong with the Series S, nothing to see here, just vague hints about outside deals. Microsoft didn't dare name Sony outright, but the insinuation was clear. This kind of woolly statement was perfect fuel for more speculation. Was it smoke and mirrors, a convenient way to deflect from the Series S's inadequacies, or was there genuinely some deeper conspiracy at play? The whole thing became a circus, and Xbox were happy to let the spotlight drift anywhere except where it belonged, on their own hardware. During this period, IGN piled on with their own anonymous source parroting the exact same line. No documents, no technical analysis, nothing but whispers and innuendo. It was like watching a school rumour spread, only instead of Urates whispering behind the bike shed, it was supposedly professional games journalists publishing unverified information for clicks. But thankfully, we would get some more concrete information later on. In January 2025, Game Science's CEO Feng Ji finally set the record straight once and for all. He confirmed that there was no secret exclusivity deal with Sony, and the reason for the delay was exactly what he had said from day one: the Xbox Series S's memory limitations. That was it. No cloak and dagger negotiations, not PlayStation waving suitcases of money around, just the hard reality that the Series S couldn't cope. So not only did Microsoft lie, but large sections of the gaming press tripped over themselves to repeat those lies, dressed up as insider scoops. And the tragic part is that a lot of Xbox fans genuinely believed them. The reality was always staring at us in the face. Xbox's weakest console was the problem, and now here we are, August of 2025. After 12 months of excuses, finger-pointing and journalistic spreading of Chinese whispers, Black Myth Wukong has finally arrived on Xbox. And what does this prove? It proves that Game Science were telling the truth all along. It was simply missing because the Series S was a nightmare to optimize for, and it took them a year to hammer the game into something that actually ran. Meanwhile, Microsoft's denials, not due to Xbox platform limitations, have aged like milk. Their PR spin was designed to deflect blame, to keep the Series S looking like a viable machine, and to stop Series X owners from asking awkward questions about why their premium console was being held back by its budget sibling. And here's the real sting. Xbox players didn't just have to wait a year, they also missed the cultural moment. By the time the game hit their platform, the PlayStation and PC crowd had already experienced it, dissected it, and moved on. Xbox is arriving unfashionably late to the party, trying to hype up a moment that's already been and gone. And this is where the whole fiasco goes from embarrassing to downright tragic for Microsoft, because the parity rules, once sold as a noble attempt at inclusivity, are now a straitjacket strangling the Xbox ecosystem. Yes, the Series S makes Xbox look more affordable and accessible. That's all well and good if you're buying a console for your kid, or if you just want something cheap to play Game Pass indies on. But the trade-off is brutal. Every single blockbuster release has to limp along on the Series S as well as on the Series X. And when a game like Black Myth Wukong pushes the limits of modern hardware, it's the Series X owners, the people who forked out for the most powerful console in the world, who end up punished. Think about it. Xbox premium buyers paid top dollar for the big shiny machine, the one Phil Spencer promised would crush the PlayStation 5 in raw horsepower, and yet here they are, getting one of the biggest releases of the decade a full year later, because Microsoft refuses to cut loose the little white anchor that is the Series S. It's like buying a Ferrari but only being allowed to drive it at 30 miles per hour because your neighbour's Fiat 500 can't keep up. The Black Myth Wukong saga exposes this weakness in stark terms. It shows that Microsoft are so desperate to defend their marketing gimmicks that they'll mislead their own customers rather than admit the obvious. Their dual console strategy is broken. The Series S is holding the entire brand back, and no amount of PR spin can cover it up anymore. It's a structural problem, and it will keep rearing its head as long as Xbox insists on pretending this console is next gen. And let's not ignore the wider picture here. Xbox have spent the better part of this generation playing catch up. While Sony delivers prestige exclusives and Nintendo carves out cultural moments with the Switch 2, Microsoft have tried to sell us on Game Pass as a replacement for games worth owning. It's a clever subscription service, sure, but services don't replace cultural impact. And when your most powerful machine can't even host one of the biggest cultural moments in gaming until a year later, your credibility takes a hammering. What an absolutely disgraceful situation. So here we are, Black Myth Wukong is finally on Xbox, but let's not kid ourselves. This isn't some victory lap. The year-long wait proves that Microsoft weren't honest with us. They try to hide behind whispers of exclusivity deals. They let journalists churn out anonymous source nonsense, and all the while the truth was sitting inside their own little white box. The Series S is the problem, it always was. And instead of admitting it, Microsoft chose to mislead their own audience, leaving Series X owners, the ones who paid the premium, twiddling their thumbs while everyone else enjoyed one of the most important games of the decade. If nothing else, the Black Myth Wukong saga shows just how far Xbox has slipped, because really, what's the point of owning the most powerful console in the world if the weaker sibling keeps you locked out of the biggest cultural moments in gaming? It's like buying front row tickets and then being told you have to sit at the back because someone else couldn't afford the better seat. And speaking of not paying full whack, let me save you from wasting money the way Xbox has wasted everyone's time. Right now, you can grab 40% off Black Myth Wukong, 24% off Mafia the Old Country, 22% off Elden Ring Night Rain, a frankly absurd 43% off Expedition 33, 29% off Stellar Blade, and yes, even Wu Chang Fallen Feathers already has a juicy discount, and that's before you even start wading through the thousands of other bargains waiting for you. So grab some fantastic bargains right now and support my work simultaneously. Or if you want to support what I do in a more personal way and access my behind the scenes cosplay library and more over on my Patreon, I'll see you all again very soon.